Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a pretty massive misconception about how we work. What if I told you that, sometimes, self-compassion actually isn't resilience at all? What if it's literally a roadblock to direct action? We constantly hear about how to regulate our emotions and manage stress at work. But what if the exact tools we're told to use are quietly breaking the momentum of your most driven people? Let's unpack the data, because it is fascinating.
Okay, consider the statement for a second. When I feel discouraged, I will be kind to myself and remind myself of the reason why I am trying. Now, this right here is treated as the absolute, universally accepted baseline for emotional regulation. If you open literally any wellness framework or sit through any corporate resilience seminar, this is the gold standard, right? The core assumption is just that if everyone does this, everyone gets better. But as you'll see, the data tells a completely different story.
There's a massive fracture in this universal assumption, and it's perfectly captured by a single statistical anomaly, a positive correlation of 0.2021. What this number actually represents is a specific group of people who actively disagree with that universal statement of self-kindness we just looked at. And no, this isn't just a random group of people having a bad day at the office.
Let's look at the raw data from a poll by Nawal Mustafa. Across 66 countries and 22 languages, people aligned with the red profile in spiral dynamics showed a positive 0.2021 correlation with disagreeing with that exact self-compassion statement. And for the data nerds tuning in, you'll know this correlation sits way above the critical threshold for reliability. So we're not looking at a tiny fluke here. This is a globally verified behavioral pattern. So why do those in the red vMEME disagree with something that sounds so positive? Well, the red psychological profile doesn't reject resilience itself. It just reads emotional regulation through a totally different lens, specifically power, autonomy, and direct action. To a red dominant profile, pausing to be kind to yourself when you're discouraged, that literally feels like hesitation. It feels like a potential softening of their immediate power assertion. They're optimizing for tangible results, not internal dialogue or soft motivational reframing. And the kicker is, this rejection of soft reflection isn't just about feeling discouraged. It completely scales across the board. Look at this matrix. When feeling insecure, this red profile shows a massive positive correlation, 0.3582, with rejecting self-acceptance. They focus entirely on tangible competency instead. When anxious, they reject deep breathing and nervous system regulation. They consistently override reflective practices in favor of action-based momentum. They literally channel negative emotion into immediate, hard action to restore their autonomy. This is exactly where universal wellness initiatives totally derail. One single statement creates entirely divergent realities. On the left, red logic demands immediate action to preserve power, but then green logic demands empathetic connection for sustainable resilience. And if we zoom out to a yellow systems thinking perspective, well, yellow says self-kindness is just one valid strategy among many, and you select it based entirely on context. One single statement, totally different biological and psychological responses. This brings us to a crucial concept, the prediction gap. This is a massive systemic failure that happens when systems treat power-focused regulation as just, quote-unquote, emotional avoidance. If you just assume everyone shares a universal understanding of resilience, this idea that self-kindness automatically equals health, you become completely blind to the fact that for a huge chunk of your team, you are actively pathologizing and removing their core coping mechanism. So what actually happens inside a company when you misalign emotional regulation like this? Well, it's rarely a dramatic explosion. It's an insidious downward cascade. First, you mandate universal compassion. Second, your action-oriented profiles experience autonomy skepticism. They feel judged, frankly. Third, they start faking this performative self-talk just to satisfy your HR metrics. And finally, you get this silent power drift. Their momentum quietly fractures, and your organization just slowly loses its raw, driving energy. To fix this, we've got to stop guessing and start measuring. What you're seeing here is the SD Navigator interface. It's built using a fascinating 2026 trend called AI vibe coding, where users just instruct language models in natural language to build apps, no traditional coding required. This specific tool taps into a database of 13,000 correlations to map what we call the algebra of conscience. It literally calculates the actual psychological reality of a group. At the absolute heart of this dashboard is the state vector, denoted as S of T. It is the exact psychological position of your organization at a specific moment in time. It takes all those soft human elements, like the red need for autonomy or the green need for connection, along with hidden metrics for fear and trust, and turns them into a hard, calculable mathematical vector. You can finally see the literal soul of the company plotted out as a definitive baseline.
And why does this math matter so much? Because a single management action triggers entirely opposite outcomes based on this hidden wiring. Take something like sending staff on unpaid vacation. You'd probably assume everyone universally hates this, right? Actually, the data shows that a highly tribal, purple profile accepts it as a ritual sacrifice, like a shared duty to survive the winter together. But an achievement-driven orange profile, they see it as an inefficient roadblock to scaling their career, and they are immediately going to update their resume. Which brings us to the transition function, S of t plus 1. Before you make any move, you run it through the system. It simulates the butterfly effects of your decisions across all these hidden psychological profiles. It spits out an overall stability score, or J, where the cost of human fear and destroyed trust is weighted just as heavily as the financial cost. It actively prevents you from making a decision that looks amazing on a spreadsheet, but completely fractures the direct action momentum of your team. Which leaves us with a pretty critical paradigm shift. Take a hard look at your own teams and your own leadership style. What breaks when self-compassion is forced as a universal rule rather than a contextual option? And moving forward, how will you design emotional regulation that doesn't just prioritize soft reflection, but actively preserves the raw power of direct action? Thanks for exploring this with us today on The Explainer.